We ready to continue? All right, so speaking of expanding that conversation, I want to introduce our next speaker really quick, and this is kind of exciting for me, being an interior nerd. Tommy Beaudreau has been the current Deputy Secretary of the Department of the Interior for quite some time, and he has many years of experience with Interior, including nearly 7 years during the Obama-Biden administration, including as the first director of the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. And he was also the acting assistant secretary for Land and Minerals Management and chief of staff to Secretary Sally Jewell. Sally Jewell is the former CEO of REI. If there's anybody that understands that intersection between industry and conservation, it would be Tommy. Something curious that I did not know, he also has more than a decade of experience with tribal consultation as well, and he was born right here in Colorado. So it just goes to show you can take the deputy secretary out of Colorado, but you can't take Colorado out of the deputy secretary because he's still back home. So please join me in welcoming Deputy Secretary Beaudreau to this desk.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you, Beth, and thank you to the Colorado Center, or to the Salazar Center here in Colorado. It is a real honor to be able to join you this morning. My boss, Secretary Holland, spoke at the symposium last year, and so it's really gratifying for me to be able to join you this year and hopefully keep a little bit of a tradition going. It's also kind of in the category of things that were meant to be. It's also a DOI alumni event. I came here directly from Mexico City, where I spent the last few days with Ambassador Salazar. I still call him Secretary Salazar. Some of you call him Senator Salazar or AG Salazar. But I had a really productive week earlier this week, having many of these exact same conversations with our counterparts in the Mexican government, as well as with folks who are on the ground working conservation issues, both in the border region as well as in southern Mexico on a daily basis, and hearing about their challenges, which are substantial, but also their purpose and optimism behind their work. So I'd like to share just kind of three quick thoughts coming out of that, more DOI alum, coming out of that, those conversations, but also a little bit about how I see and how the department sees conservation under an America the Beautiful umbrella, actually as a key component of our overall strategy with respect to both the threats and challenges facing the United States, especially the Western United States, as well as our relationship with Mexico. So I'll just say incredibly powerful, inspiring, and insightful panel that we just heard from. And everything that was discussed resonates very strongly with the department and with what I heard when I was in Mexico. And I think one of the insights that Ambassador Salazar has, as well as one of the kind of organizing principles and values of the Salazar Center, is that conservation truly is part of the solution. So for all the reasons that we've heard and talked about, the borderlands suite of challenges is incredibly complex. And there's geopolitics, there's cynicism, there's desperation, there's macroeconomics at play, and so there's no single solution. But conservation and cooperative conservation is part of the answer. And that's why you've seen Ambassador Salazar, right from the get-go, he called me right after he was confirmed, and one of the first things he said was, we need to get as many senior people from the Biden administration into Mexico talking about conservation as possible, because it hits on our common humanity and our common needs and literally and figuratively common ground, where out of that we can develop understanding and also address the challenges that are facing us. And we've tried to sort of carry that strategy forward. So with respect to the border regions, one of the ways we can make that, again, literal and figurative bridge is through transboundary cooperation and conservation and unite communities. And so this is one of the reasons why you've seen the department and you've seen Ambassador Salazar put so much emphasis in, for example, the Dos Laredos effort to literally reunite a community that has been divided by politics and global issues outside of their control, and to have a green space, a shared space that brings these communities back together, the families, the heritage, everything that we've been talking about through the power of conservation is incredibly powerful and, again, humanizes the effort. In order to achieve that, it requires, and this is both the mechanism as well as the benefit, it requires substantial partnership and cooperation. Resources from the government, of course, bilateral cooperation and work, but also grassroots community organizing, participation from civil society, and knitting together the resources necessary to fulfill that vision. And so on the one hand, you think about that type of effort as a challenge in and of itself, and of course it is, but it's through that work and that relationship that you actually establish something durable and lasting and beneficial. And so we view very much the conservation opportunities in the border region as not only necessary to sustain the ecosystems and the people and the culture and the indigenous way of life that, again, has been part of the fabric for time immemorial, but literally part of the very necessary healing process between our two nations. But it's not only about the border relationships. The power of conservation also can carry forward in helping address some of the larger macro issues that are impacting the border area. And that's another reason why I spent a good amount of time while I was in Mexico, and it's been a big emphasis of Ambassador Salazar as well as ours, is looking at and working on conservation in the southern part of Mexico in the Selva Maya region. The Selva Maya, as all of you know, is the lungs of Central America. It is the largest rainforest in the Western Hemisphere, except for the Amazon, of course. And it is under all of the threats and pressures that one can imagine. And a conservation strategy is actually key to addressing not only the environmental and climate threats that are putting pressure on the region, but also the social and economic threats that underlie so much of the encroachment that we're seeing on those ecosystems. And so I was truly inspired to sit down and talk with representatives from the Rainforest Alliance, TNC, Pro Natura, WWF, and others, talking about how they're on the ground in communities figuring out solutions through partnerships, including investment strategies, as well as public-private partnerships, to give people a answer and solutions to the pressures that are facing them and that are driving the degradation of that very important region. And that was, again, you talk about the challenges and they feel overwhelming, but to talk to folks who have spent decades embedded in communities thinking about the pragmatic solutions to protect the area that they call home, it's also, I think, a powerful way of thinking about how durable conservation can actually have a major impact on communities, provide economic opportunity, and begin addressing issues like the migration challenges emanating from that part of the country. The last thought I want to touch on, and it'll be a part of the conversation throughout the symposium and something that my friend Tanya Trujillo is going to spend time talking about later in the symposium as well, is water. The drought, as folks here know better than anyone, is one of the major crises facing the United States right now. And it is not only a crisis for the United States and the Western United States, but to our indispensable partner in Mexico. Mexico has to be part of the solution, both with respect to the Colorado River Basin as well as the Rio Grande Basin. And that was part of my conversations over the last few days in Mexico as well. And I can tell you the spirit of, I'll be honest, I wasn't sure what to expect because obviously on the Colorado River, we're upstream, we're having to take pretty strong measures in light of the decreasing water supply, and that obviously affects Mexico. And so I wasn't sure what to expect exactly, whether there would be resentment, whether I would hear strong concerns about being at the table and part of the solution. What I heard instead was genuine outreach and spirit of partnership and understanding that the cooperation necessary to tackle the fundamental change in hydrology that we've witnessed over the last couple decades has established a new normal, and very much a spirit of Mexico wanting to be engaged in developing those solutions. And that was incredibly encouraging to me to know that we have such a strong partner on one of the most difficult challenges facing all of us. So there's lots of different ways to describe that. I couldn't agree more that part of the challenge here is education, is changing the narrative of what these stressors, social, economic, political, environmental, what those stressors really mean in terms of the human beings in the region, and making that less a flashpoint that cynical politicians on both sides of the border can take advantage of, but rather a true opportunity in terms of common ground and spirit of cooperation. And I think conservation helps us do that. I think talking about the work of conservation helps change that narrative, helps humanize the issues, and provides all of the folks working on these issues and in the region a way to talk about the positive things that can come from our enduring relationships. So those are just about a couple thoughts. Again, incredibly happy to be here with you. And again, the stars align to be able to come directly from these conversations in Mexico City, share them with you, and hopefully have a few minutes for question or conversation now as well. So again, thank you for including me today.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Secretary. And again, for those of you that are still scared by the internet machine, don't be intimidated. Scan the QRF code, post your questions. We'll have them up here. For those of you that want to make it live and in person, there'll be a microphone running around, so please raise your hand. So just a really quick kickoff question for you. And this comes from me, not from, oh, no, there we go. Okay, good. It's the same thing on my paper. How ironic. So Interior has many philanthropic partners, NPF and FWF. There's a lot of them. How can these groups be leveraged to help realize these national conservation targets, especially around, say, the America the Beautiful goals, things like that?
Yeah, so writ large, and it applies both purely domestically, but also in our international relationships in North America with Canada and with Mexico. This is a really exciting moment. As you've seen through two big pieces of legislation, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and now the Inflation Reduction Act, there have been billions and billions of dollars worth of investment made in climate resiliency, restoration work, and resources to address challenges like the extreme drought facing the Western United States. As the technocratic nerd whose job it is to get the most out of those dollars, the only way we can fully implement and fully bring true value out of all of those resources is through public-private partnerships. And so just one example, NIFWF is on the board there. We're already working with NIFWF to bring that network, that experience, those relationships to bear in terms of deploying dollars and getting these resources out on the ground on restoration and resiliency projects as quickly as possible. I want to get the money out, but I also want to do it in as strategic way as possible. And that is why these partnerships are also so extremely important. We've got folks in this room as well as in the broader community who have been working on resiliency strategies and connectivity strategies and the hard work of conservation in particular locations as well as in basins and landscapes for decades. So we don't have to recreate that. What we can do is provide resources into it. That not only accelerates the deployment of resources, but can do it in a strategic way that, again, maximizes the impact and anticipates the increased threats that we have to contend with because of climate. And so not merely solving for today's moment, but being strategic and thinking ahead. Our partnerships are absolutely a key to achieving all of that.
That's great. Thank you. So I think we'll go from the screen to the room. I think we have a question over here. Oh, look at that. Yes, Director Hall.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for being here, Deputy Secretary. Good to see you again, and welcome back to Colorado. So I'm Connor Hall. I run the Colorado Outdoor Recreation Industry Office. I have the enviable job of filling Nathan Fay and Luis Benitez's shoes. And, Colorado has really led the way on this movement to give a real voice and political power to the outdoor recreation industry, to organize that voice of an industry that's bigger than the pharmaceutical industry or the automotive or mining industry in this country. And so we've led in the confluence of states, pulling together all these different offices or helping start offices of outdoor recreation around the country, as you well know. And one of our top priorities as a group, and this is a bipartisan group of now nearly 19 states across the country, is conservation and stewardship. And as we've seen increased usage all around the country of our natural assets, that is more important than ever. And so the next step as a coalition, one of our top priorities is to get a federal office, a federal equivalent office of outdoor recreation to represent all of these states and work with us on that level. And obviously the Federal Interagency Council on Outdoor Recreation, FICOR, being revived is a great step. But I think the sense among the states is still we'd love to see that office. So would love to hear how you guys are thinking about that, anything we can do to help with that effort.
Yeah, no, that's terrific. And first of all, couldn't agree more that outdoor recreation, and you mentioned, Save Our Winners, and as a hockey player, who grew up playing on ponds, and it is a galvanizing system for many people, right? To think in concrete terms about what conservation means, what the challenges of climate change mean. And so I think reestablishing FICOR and putting as much emphasis and resource that this administration has into FICOR is a major step in that direction, and an acknowledgement of everything that you described, that this is truly a way to galvanize and mobilize around conservation. I also think, and this is why, I personally spend a lot of time, for example, working with the sporting community as well. And so I think, again, in the spirit of trying to find common ground and depoliticize issues, for folks who are interested in the full range of recreational activities, including hunting and fishing, that's a key way to get past red state, blue state politics and talk about conservation that really resonates with people and hits activities and traditions that they hold dear. And I've found when you do that, a lot of the noise kind of goes away, and you start having real conversations about wildlife corridors and protected areas and ensuring access for hikers and climbers, et cetera. And so I believe in the power of it. I think we have work to do. Establishing FICOR was part of it. I personally am, quite interested in the idea of having an office, as we do in so many sectors, focused on this industry, if you want to put it that way. And my only strong point of view about it is that it should be situated in the Interior Department, if it happens.
Ooh, little fight between Interior and Commerce. Okay, all right.
Or ag.
Or ag, that's good.
Yeah.
Great. Well, let's. We've got a few more time-sensitive questions. A little bit more time. Let's go to the screen really quick. Maybe for a little teaser. Does DOI have any plans for any new protected areas in the borderlands, monuments, parks, etc.? Anything out there?
Yeah, and we've touched on some of it, right? And all of these, and this is something that again comes through in these conversations. The right approach to conservation, and by right I mean durable, serving local communities, serving tribes, is to have it come grassroots, to bring it up. I know President Biden is very interested in his authorities. You saw it, with the restoration of Bears Ears, that all the tools are on the table and available. The work of this community, though, is to establish the grassroots case and support for these conservation efforts. And so we will be very interested in working across the board to identify those places where that coalition exists, that support exists. The importance has been made clear, and do some good conservation in the next few years.
Wonderful. Question in the room, right here. I've got one up front. Oh, the one right there. Okay.
Okay. Hi, I'm so glad that you're here, Deputy Secretary. It's wonderful to have your input. I'm Diana Hadley, and I'm a ranch owner from the border in Arizona and New Mexico. And I'm also work with the Northern Jaguar Project, which is a nonprofit that is attempting to get wildlife across the border, including big wildlife like jaguars. My question is, how do we get some kind of unity among Western landowners who own huge amounts of property all along the border in all of the border states? How can we get restoration funding for this group of people who are not organized as a group, in contrast to NGOs and to governmental agencies?
Yeah. So I think one of the keys to that, and again, it's in the border region, but the Western United States writ large, is again, if you get beneath kind of some of the more divisive politics, many of those landowners, part of their sort of identity and self-image is stewardship, and many of them see, whether they want to say it's climate change or whatever, like they see changes on the landscapes that they care about, and want to maintain their traditions, and that includes, for example, with wildlife migration. So I've had a lot of conversations with ranchers, for example, and hear like this strong interest in tools like conservation easements, tools like wildlife corridors, because they have seen changes and they want antelope to come across their property again. They understand that there's less water and that is affecting not only their operations, but how their property and their neighbor's property is functioning. And so I think part of the strategy has to be through, again, locally led conservation work that develops relationships over a long period of time, develops trust, and we can resource it. Interior Department, NRCS, we have the tools to facilitate that, but it is the hard work over many years and decades to build the trust and the relationships in order to do it. I also think, in this moment in particular, there is a powerful opportunity for cooperation with tribes to facilitate conservation. And we're thinking actively through, given resources that we have, what are tools that we can either interpret or create that allow for the types of partnerships with tribes that to date have been used in other contexts, but tribal communities have been left out of, and I think those are important mechanisms as well.
Thank you. So, gang, in the interest of time, I will encourage all of you with the questions still remaining on the screen. If the Deputy Secretary is going to be hanging out for a little while, accost him gently during the break time to ask him your follow-up questions, please. And please join me in thanking the Deputy Secretary for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Okay, gang, so we got a 10-minute break. You need to be back in the room by 10:30, and here's your goal other than bathroom and email. I want you to fist bump, elbow, or hug somebody that you've never met before. You don't need to introduce yourself. Just, you can say number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, not an awkward hug, number 5. That's our goal. Ready? 10 minutes, everybody, back in the room. Thank you.